Imagine leaving a freshly made sandwich just sitting on the kitchen table for your 11-year-old daughter.
Yeah, just a totally normal thing to do.
Right, but now imagine that sandwich sitting there untouched, and it slowly becomes this ticking clock on a 29-year murder investigation. Welcome to this deep dive, custom tailored just for you.
It's quite a heavy one today.
It really is. Today, we are taking your source stack to dismantle this idea of the perfect crime. We're heading to Moline, Illinois. The date is August 21st, 1996.
So the timeline is the foundational architecture of this entire case. The day before she vanished, Trudy was just, being a kid. She spent the day inline skating with friends around her neighborhood in Moline, and she was dropped off at her driveway around 8 p.m. The crucial sequence really begins the next morning, August 21st. She had a firm plan.
A phone call, right?
Exactly. A phone call scheduled with her best friend at 9:00 a.m.
Which is a brilliant anchor point for investigators. I mean, for an 11-year-old in 1996, before smartphones and constant texting, a scheduled morning call on a landline with your best friend is, well, it's an ironclad commitment.
Yeah, you just didn't miss those.
Right. But she didn't answer that call. And what the sources highlight is this massive discrepancy between what her father assumed she was doing that morning and what she was actually prepared for.
That's the detail that shifts the entire context of her disappearance. She had explicitly asked her father, Dennis Appleby, if she could go swimming that day.
And he said no.
He told her no. But when a witness spots Trudy just 30 minutes after that missed phone call, so around 9:30 a.m. near 41st Street and 23rd Avenue, she is dressed for the water.
Which is wild.
Yeah, she's wearing a black one-piece swimsuit with spandex shorts over it, blue tennis shoes, and she's actually carrying a beach towel.
And she is seen getting into a four-door box-type vehicle. Investigators believe it was a silver or gray Chevy Celebrity driven by a white male in his 20s. And that specific detail brings us to the domestic scene that I honestly can't shake.
The lunch?
Yes, the lunch. Her father comes home from his job during his lunch break. He walks in, the house is empty, and he just assumes she's out playing in the neighborhood. So he makes her a sandwich, leaves it on the kitchen table for her, and he goes back to work.
Only to return at the end of the day to find the house still empty and that lunch just completely untouched.
I was trying to wrap my head around the dread of that moment. When he first set that plate down, it was just an act of care, like a perfectly ordinary object. But the moment he walks back in and sees it still sitting there, the bread stale, it instantly stops being a sandwich and becomes, well, it's like an hourglass.
Oh, wow, yeah.
It's a terrifying indicator that time had run out.
What's fascinating here is how law enforcement relies on those deeply personal domestic routines to establish parameters. That tiny 30-minute window between the 9:00 a.m. missed call and the 9:30 a.m. sighting getting into the Chevy Celebrity, that's the crucial anchor point that investigators would obsess over for the next 29 years.
Because it's so tight.
Exactly. In abduction cases, the mechanics of a timeline dictate the suspect pool. The fact that she was taken or, willingly got into a car so quickly after missing a call suggests a very narrow window of opportunity.
Right. It means it wasn't just someone passing by.
Yeah, it points away from a random crime of opportunity by a stranger passing through and strongly hints at someone who knew her routine, or at least someone she was comfortable enough with to defy her father's rules for.
So despite having that tight timeline, and despite a massive ground search and a $10,000 reward from Crime Stoppers, the trail completely evaporates. I mean, the Doe Network classifies it as a non-family abduction, but the leads just stop generating momentum. We see the narrative shift here from a frantic active search into a painful multi-decade war of attrition.
The mechanics of a cold case are just brutal. Having an investigative theory or even having a strong suspicion about who is responsible is vastly different from possessing the legal ammunition required to prove it in a courtroom.
Which is so frustrating to read about.
It is. Law enforcement often has to play a waiting game, applying strategic pressure over years or even decades.
The sources show exactly how that pressure was applied, but it feels agonizingly slow. It isn't until 2017, 21 years after she vanished, that police publicly named their first person of interest, or POI, William Ed Smith.
Right, Ed Smith.
He is believed to be one of the last people in contact with Trudy. He also owned a vehicle that perfectly matched that silver Chevy Celebrity seen in the driveway.
Yeah, and that car.
A car that, very conveniently, was scrapped shortly after she disappeared.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
Right. Then, 3 years later, in August 2020, police dropped two more names, David Whipple and Jamison Jamie Fisher. They state point blank to the public that these men likely know what happened.
They even escalate the pressure physically. In January 2021, authorities seize a boat connected to the investigation and conduct searches on Campbell's Island, which is where they believe Trudy was actually heading to swim.
But no remains are found.
No. And this introduces the ultimate antagonist in any cold case, which is just the passage of time itself. William Smith actually died in December 2014, 3 years before the police ever named him publicly.
Oh, wow.
And David Whipple dies at his home in August 2022.
Wait, I have to push back on this strategy, though, because as a reader, looking at these sources, it is incredibly frustrating. If the police heavily suspected these men, if they knew Smith was tied to the exact make and model of the suspect's car, why do they just sit back and watch them die off one by one without making an arrest? I mean, it feels like a massive failure of the system.
I understand that frustration completely, I do, but it actually highlights a foundational mechanism of the American legal system. Our justice system is purposefully designed with an incredibly high threshold to strip a citizen of their liberty.
Right? Innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly. The underlying philosophy is that it is better to let a guilty person go free than to put an innocent person in a cage. In a cold case, time weaponizes this principle in favor of the killer.
Because physical evidence decays.
Precisely. The Chevy Celebrity was scrapped almost immediately. Any physical trace, hair, fibers, fingerprints, it was all destroyed with it. Without a body and without the crime scene, you are relying almost entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness memory.
Which isn't enough on its own.
Not usually, no. Prosecutors knew that if they arrested Smith in, say, 1998 with only a hunch and a scrapped car, a defense attorney would just tear the case apart. The jury would acquit him.
And double jeopardy attaches.
Exactly. Because of double jeopardy, they could never try him again, even if they found the body the very next day. They watched these men die because they legally could not clear the bar of beyond a reasonable doubt. The decay of evidence over decades serves as this impenetrable shield for perpetrators.
Which leaves Jamison Fisher as the last man standing out of the three suspects. He was an associate of Smith and actually a family friend of the Applebys. For years, he's just waiting it out, watching his alleged accomplices take their shared secrets to the grave. He probably thought the shield of time had worked perfectly.
But the very thing that protected these men, the passage of time, is exactly what ends up destroying Fisher's sense of security. Because while time decays physical evidence like a scrapped car, it also decays loyalty.
Oh, that's a good point.
It decays the fear that keeps witnesses quiet. The frustration of watching two suspects die naturally creates a desperation that leads directly to the monumental shift we see in 2025.
Yeah, late in 2025, specifically in August, a Henry County grand jury finally indicts 50-year-old Jamison Fisher. U.S. Marshals pull him out of a jail cell in Scott County, Iowa, where he was already sitting on unrelated charges, and they extradite him to Illinois.
It was a huge moment.
The charges he faces for Trudy's disappearance are 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of concealment of a homicidal death.
The breakdown of those charges is vital to understand the state's strategy. Notice that kidnapping is entirely absent from that indictment.
Because the statute of limitations had already expired.
Right. That's the mechanical reality of the law. Statutes of limitations exist because, over time, memories fade, alibis become impossible to prove, and evidence is lost. The legislature puts a timer on most crimes to ensure fair trials.
But murder is different.
Murder is the ultimate exception. Society deems the unauthorized taking of a human life too severe to ever forgive based merely on the calendar. Murder has no expiration date. Authorities allege that Fisher strangled Trudy and then concealed her remains. Because they can only charge him with murder, they face an immense burden. They must prove intent and action without the physical context a kidnapping charge would provide.
Following the indictment, the Moline police chief, Darren Galt, gave a very sobering press conference. He explicitly said, "Today is not about celebration. It's about a resolution. It's about accountability." He said, "This arrest does not erase the pain, but it does bring us one step closer to closure."
It was a very measured statement.
It was. But Chief Galt held back the darkest piece of the puzzle that day. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the legal analysis from Crimes Digest dug into the charging documents and uncovered the actual motive.
They found the why. And in a circumstantial case, the why is everything.
Witnesses finally came forward and told prosecutors that Trudy was not just randomly abducted off the street by a stranger. She was taken as collateral for a drug debt owed by her own father, Dennis Appleby.
The psychological devastation of that revelation is just profound.
I can't even fathom the horror of it. I mean, you have a father who spent 29 years holding vigils, talking to the media, keeping his daughter's name alive, dying inside every single time he walked past that kitchen table where he left her a sandwich,
Yeah.
only for the authorities to realize that his own actions, his own debts, may have been the very mechanism that put the target on his 11-year-old daughter's back.
It adds an incredibly tragic, dark layer to the narrative. But if we look at this strictly through the lens of investigative strategy, this specific motive is exactly the glue the prosecutors desperately needed.
How so?
Well, a drug debt explains the entire mechanism of the crime. It explains the pre-existing relationship and why Fisher, who was a family friend, was able to get her into the car without a struggle.
Yet she trusted him.
Exactly. It explains the coordination between Fisher, Smith, and Whipple. It transforms a seemingly random, inexplicable disappearance into a calculated transactional crime. It gives the jury a coherent, logical narrative.
And building a narrative for the jury is going to be the ultimate battle here because we are moving into the courtroom strategy now. We are drawing extensively from the analysis of former defense attorney Christopher Winchell in Crimes Digest. Because Fisher is facing trial for first-degree murder, and the state still does not have Trudy's body.
This is where we confront that cultural myth you mentioned earlier. No body, no case. It makes for great television, but legally it is entirely false.
It's totally fake.
Yeah. In Illinois, and really across the United States, you can secure a murder conviction without a physical body if you can definitively prove the corpus delicti.
Corpus delicti, the body of the crime.
Yes. The phrase confuses people because of the word body. It does not literally mean a physical corpse. It means proving that a crime occurred and that the crime was the specific cause of a death. You have to prove two things.
Okay, what are they?
First, that the person is undeniably dead, and second, that they died by criminal agency, not by accident or suicide.
You know, I read an analogy once that proving corpus delicti without remains is like painting a perfect silhouette. You don't actually have the subject, the body, to show the jury. So you have to paint the negative space around it so meticulously.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, you use the sudden cessation of all phone records, the witness testimonies about the drug debt, the historical timeline of the scrapped Chevy celebrity, the statements from the men who died. You paint all of that circumstantial evidence so perfectly that the jury clearly sees the unmistakable shape of a murder, even if the body itself is completely invisible to them.
That is an excellent way to visualize the mechanics of circumstantial evidence. The prosecution is asking the jury to look at the negative space and conclude that the only logical explanation for Trudy's total disappearance from the face of the earth is that Jameson Fisher murdered her.
But Christopher Winchell lays out the exact playbook the defense will use to counter that silhouette, and it's aggressive. Fisher's defense isn't just going to sit there. They are going to actively plant seeds of reasonable doubt, and their primary weapon will be invoking names that every single person in that jury box will instantly recognize.
Oh, absolutely.
Names like Elizabeth Smart and J.C. Dugard.
It is a highly calculated psychological strategy. Elizabeth Smart was taken and missing for 9 months. J.C. Dugard was missing for 18 years. Both of them were eventually found alive.
Right.
The defense will use these visceral, real-world examples to hammer a single agonizing concept into the minds of the jury. Absence does not equal death. They will look the jurors in the eye and argue that without physical remains, without a single bone or fiber to examine, the state simply cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Trudy isn't locked in a basement somewhere, still alive.
They will weaponize the jury's own hope against the prosecution.
Yes, exactly.
So what does this all mean? Because I'll be honest, if I'm sitting in that jury box and I'm being asked to strip a man of his freedom for the rest of his natural life, the lack of a body is a massive psychological block.
It is for anyone.
Yeah, I hear the state say he strangled her, but then the defense says, show us the evidence of strangulation.
Yeah.
How does a prosecutor actually overcome that deeply ingrained human hesitation to convict without physical proof?
It is an incredibly steep uphill battle. The state is acutely aware of how difficult it is to convince 12 ordinary people to ignore that hesitation. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sheer difficulty of winning a no-body trial is precisely why prosecutors might execute a completely different legal maneuver before a jury is ever seated.
A plea deal.
Specifically, the proffer agreement leading to a plea deal.
Okay, break down the mechanics of a proffer for us. How does a prosecutor sit in a room and negotiate with an alleged child killer?
It's intense. A proffer session, sometimes called being queen for a day, is essentially a legally binding safe word session. The prosecution approaches the defense and offers a trade. They say, we will take the maximum penalty, life without parole, off the table. We will offer you a lesser charge or a reduced sentence. In exchange, you must confess, and you must tell us exactly where you hid the remains.
So he can just say whatever without risk.
During the proffer, yes, the suspect can admit to everything. If the deal falls through, the state cannot use the suspect's specific confession against them in court.
But they can use the physical evidence that the confession leads them to.
Exactly. It's a mechanism designed to prioritize the recovery of the victim over the severity of the punishment. But as Winchell points out in his analysis, the state isn't just going to take Fisher's word for it. It requires a verifiable proffer.
So he can't just lie.
Right. Fisher can't just wave his hand and point to a random swamp on Campbell's Island. He has to provide specific, actionable facts that only the true killer would know. The state goes to the location he provides. If the remains are there, the deal is executed. If he lies, or if the remains aren't there, the state voids the deal and they go to trial.
Wow. It is an astronomical gamble for both sides. I mean, the prosecution have to weigh the very real risk of a jury acquitting Fisher at trial against the family's desperate 30-year need for physical closure.
Yeah.
They trade the absolute certainty of maximum punishment for the certainty of bringing Trudy home. And for Fisher, his only leverage in this negotiation is the fact that he hid the body so perfectly. But if he rolls the dice, rejects a deal, goes to trial and loses, Illinois murder sentences are unforgiving. He will die in a concrete cell.
It is a profound legal standoff. The state holds the immense power of the indictment, but the defendant holds the final, agonizing piece of the puzzle.
Which brings us back to you, listening to this custom-tailored dive. Why does a cold case from a small city in Illinois in 1996 matter to how we understand the world today? Because it is a testament to the dual nature of time. Yes, time destroyed the Chevy celebrity. It allowed William Smith and David Whipple to take their secrets to the grave, completely shielded from consequence.
It eroded the physical trail until there was almost nothing left but negative space.
Exactly. But time also eroded the silence. It eroded the fear and the toxic loyalty that kept witnesses quiet about a father's drug debt for 3 decades. This case proves that a 30-year-old secret, no matter how meticulously hidden, can still catch up with you.
And it leaves us with an incredibly dark philosophical paradox about the mechanics of our justice system to mull over. Think about the nature of that potential plea deal we just walked through. What does it say about our legal framework that a killer's ultimate leverage, the very currency they might use to buy a lesser sentence and save themselves from dying in prison, is the extreme cruelty of having hidden their victim so perfectly for 3 decades? Their greatest defense, their only bargaining chip, is the sheer magnitude of their own crime.
That is a chilling thought. A man sitting in an interrogation room bargaining for his life, using the exact geographic coordinates where he buried a child's untouched future. It brings us right back to that kitchen table in Moline. A father setting down a sandwich for an 11-year-old girl, completely unaware that he had just flipped an hourglass and the sand was already running out. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.